I want to clarify that this story is true, and as I write it, it happened about 6 months ago. In mid-November 2017, I was working at Checkfield I in my hometown in Mexico City, a very small town, barely 5,000 inhabitants. But hey, that's enough to set the scene. It all started when I was called to replace a new employee who didn't show up for his job. It was already the third time in a row, so my manager contacted me. I didn't mind going too much. Money is money, and I knew that some colleagues I knew well would be there, so I figured time would pass quickly. In addition to them, there were 3 other staff members that I knew less. They had only started a few months ago, and I hadn't really had the courage to talk to them. For the purposes of this story, I'm going to give them first names: Alex, Luke, and Eric. My 2 friends are Lucy and Sam. To be clear, Alex was the manager that night. The vibe was a little weird. There were almost no customers, which was a change from usual, but I wasn't complaining. I figured the workload would be lighter, even if the service would be a little longer. Around 11 o'clock p.m., Luke and Alex left, leaving Eric, Sam, Lucy, and me. Managed the last hour of the night service. Then, to our surprise, there was a sudden influx of customers in the space of 10 minutes. We had served about 20 people, and it was a bit of a panic during this rush. Eric hurt himself burning his hand on the grill. Lucy had to take him to the hospital, which left Sam and I alone to finish serving, clean up, and close at 00 as scheduled. Other than this spike in customers, everything went smoothly. Even though we were understaffed and had to stay an extra half hour to finish the cleaning, once the cleaning was done, Eric left and I finished the closing. I worked there for 2 years, so I guess Sam trusted me enough to let me handle it. Anyway, I closed the door and started walking to my car. But before I could even get there, I felt a violent blow in the back of my head. The next day, I woke up in a living room chair. I tried to get up, but I was completely paralyzed. The only thing I could compare it to was sleep paralysis. There, I started to panic. 1,000 thoughts crossed me. The mind that had done this to me, why? Why I couldn't move anymore. You know, the kind of question you ask yourself when you wake up in a situation like this. I tried to call for help, but all that came out of my mouth was an incomprehensible mutter. Like someone who just had a stroke. That's when I heard a voice. Well, did you wake up? My eyes searched for the source of that voice, but I couldn't even turn my head or move a muscle. I was terrified. My mind was racing at 1,000 an hour. Then the person came forward. He was tall. It was Eric. He was wearing a surgical mask. His look was terrifying, and he was holding a scalpel in his hand. There, I completely panicked. He said, "I've been waiting for this moment for months." Without hesitation, he began to slice my arm with the scalpel. And by the way he did it, you could see that this was not the first time. The pain was unbearable, but I could only moan, not move, not scream. And then, miracle siren beacon, it was the police. Eric stood up, knife still in hand, destabilized by the noises. Within seconds, the cops broke down the door. Eric refused to let go of the scalpel, so they shot him. Rescue arrived shortly after. Police were able to stop the bleeding. They also understood that they had drugged me with a substance made to paralyze me, probably so that I would be aware that I was seeing him cutting me alive. Later, I learned that if I was still alive, it was only because Lucy and it had happened to me at the restaurant. I knew my car was still there. They looked at the security camera footage and saw me getting hit in the head by Eric. They called the cops right away, and I also learned that I was not his first victim. The guy whose shift I was covering that night, he hadn't been absent. Eric killed him about 5 years ago. I lived in a small rural town in a building that frankly had no place there. It was located about 5 kilometers from the city, at the end of a country road with very few houses around. That said, the place was still quiet aside from a few drunk neighbors from time to time. It was a normal day. I did 3-8, so I slept as soon as I got home from work unless I wasn't working. The next night, August 7th, a date I will never forget, I came home from work. I figured I'd take a little nap before heading out for some errands. I woke up dressed and was about to get in the car when my neighbor Tyler stopped me. He asked me what I was doing the night before. He explained that he had seen me outside tinkering with one of the mosquito nets in my window. I assured him that I was at work the night before and that he was probably a drunk jerk. I went on with my day. Got my groceries, then came home around 8 o'clock, put away the groceries and turned on the TV. Honestly, I had completely forgotten about this story. Around 11 o'clock or 12 intro, I went to bed, turned off the TV and headed for the stairs. I was height friend when I heard a big noise coming from the living room, where I was a few seconds earlier. I stood frozen for about 30 seconds, then decided to continue climbing. Barely 5 seconds later, I heard the sound of a glass exploding my living room window. So there you go, I'm a tall guy, 6'8", 13%, 30 kilos. Suffice it to say that I have zero tolerance for anyone breaking into my house. In my head, I told myself that anyone would see my build and run. But no. I rushed back down to see what was going on, and sure enough, a man was halfway through my window. I was paralyzed. I had heard this story hundreds of times and now it was my turn. He landed on the ground, got up, and our eyes met. The only thing I could say was, "Get out of my house right now." But he had other plans. We stood there staring at each other for what seemed like an eternity. He had this frozen, almost paralyzing smile. That's when I saw the knife in his hand. I said out loud, "You take one more step, I'll kill you." He didn't move, but he said, "If you'd worked tonight, none of this would have happened." And then I understood. This guy wanted to kill me, or at least try to. I turned around, ran upstairs, reached my room and slammed the door. It does not lock, unfortunately. But I have my Smith & Wesson .45 caliber always sitting on my nightstand. I picked up the phone and called 911. I explained the situation to the operator and I will always remember her answer. "If your door opens before the agents arrive, you have the right to defend yourself." There in my head, I said to myself, "Come try, you'll see." I couldn't hear anything downstairs, complete silence. I stood still. 5 minutes later, I heard the cops coming. I opened my window and screamed. I didn't even know if the man was still down there. They told me to stay up there. I threw my keys out the window so they could get in. Then I heard my front door open. "Drop the knife on the ground," shouted one of the agents. 2 minutes later, another cop yelled that I could get down. I walked out of my room while he took her to the car. One of the policewomen explained to me that when he entered, he found her sitting quietly on my couch. He wasn't doing anything, he was just sitting there. It chilled my blood. What was he waiting for? What was he doing in my living room? Since I moved more than 60 kilometers away, I never had any more worries, but that night he still haunts me. All I can say is protect yourself, you never know what might happen. In his case, he seemed to know when I was working, probably thought I wasn't there. But then why stay downstairs sitting with a knife? He probably didn't want to rob me. Maybe he wanted to wait for me and kill me when I returned. This is a story my mother told my brothers, sister and me. At the time she was working as a cleaner in an office building with several other employees one night. She agreed to do the night shift to replace a friend. She usually worked in the morning and almost always finished before noon. That night she was given the task of cleaning the top floor and then going back down, cleaning each floor up to about half of the building before she got that position. Some of his colleagues who had worked there much longer had told him that the 8th floor was haunted. A ghost was rumored to be screaming horribly there around midnight, of course. She had been surprised but not really impressed. She thought her new colleagues were just trying to scare her. After all, she was new and had only been here a few weeks. She also explained to me that each floor had a dial to adjust the lights that had to be adjusted for a certain duration. As time passed, the lights gradually went out, floor by floor. In general, they spent an hour per floor before going down to the next. That night, once she finished 9th, she went down to 8th. She set the timer to 1 o'clock and got to work. After 55 minutes, she told me that she suddenly heard one of the most chilling and terrifying screams of her entire life. A scream that seemed to come from the hallway, or more precisely from one of the desks she was cleaning. Panicked, she dropped everything and started running to the elevator behind her. She heard the loud cries of a woman like those heard only in horror movies. As she ran away, the lights she had set for 1 hour began to go out one by one, plunging the floor into progressive darkness. She eventually reached the elevator and came out safe and sound. The next day, she made a phone call to resign. I live in a small town in Kentucky where not much happens. I'm 22 years old. I'm a volunteer operator for the 911, and I also have some kind of gift. I can see and hear spirits. This story goes back about 4 years and is still going on today. I was working an evening shift and decided to show up a little earlier than planned. I packed my things and told my supervisor I was going home. But suddenly, another volunteer arrived running, explaining to us that a car had just been found abandoned. With no trace of the driver, the police launched searches everywhere to find the woman in question. Let's call Krista. Apparently, Krista was on her way home via the BG, and according to the police, her car must have broken down. A year has passed since that night, and no one has seen or heard from Krista again. She was gone. People in our town started saying that she must be dead or that she may have run away. The police conducted a thorough investigation, but they found nothing. Everyone thought her boyfriend Bo was related to the disappearance, but the cops were never able to prove it. This all happened about 4 or 5 years ago. You may be wondering what this has to do with me. Well, a few months ago I started having nightmares, recurring dreams, still on the same woman. Her car broke down. She went to get help. Then they were taken away. Does that ring a bell? It should. Because at the time I didn't even know Krista's car had broken down, nor did he think she had gone to get help. All I knew was that a car had been found on the side of the road, nothing more. But over time the nightmares became more and more detailed, more and more violent. And the last one I did, I saw it very clearly, 2 men burying a body in the woods. I'm convinced Krista was murdered, and I think she's trying to show me where her killers buried her body. I live in a big city now. After moving out of a small town a few months ago, I'm in college studying for a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. I live with my mother and 2-year-old son in an old building that we just moved into. The building seems safe. But what happened to me about a week ago completely changed my mind. I work nights. I start at 5:30 p.m. and I usually finish around 4 a.m. It was a few days after Halloween, and my mother was babysitting my son at the apartment. A colleague sometimes drops me off, and that evening he had just taken me home. Since I am a young woman alone and it is night in a big city, he has taken to the habit of accompanying me to the door. I thank him. Then I look for my key because the entrance to the building is supposed to be locked after 10 p.m. Normally only residents can enter after that time, but when I turned the handle, the door opened without even needing the key. It was weird. I said to myself, this is not normal. These doors never open like that. I went in and took the elevator inside. I bent down to put my key in my bag, and there I heard someone come up with me. When I looked up, I had one of those scares. Before me stood a man dressed as a clown. A full outfit, blue suit with white stripes, huge blue clown shoes, blue curly wig, red nose, and blue and red makeup that drew a smile. But he wasn't smiling. His face was frozen in an empty, icy expression. The doors closed. I politely said good evening as I always do, but at that moment his blank stare turned into a grim expression as the elevator went up. I wonder what he's doing here at this hour. Is there a party or something? But hey, we don't have birthday parties at 05 arc in the morning, especially not for children, and that's normally the only context where we see clowns. Then I noticed he was carrying a bag. I hadn't seen him when I entered. He stared at me with his unhealthy look, leaned over and pulled something out of that bag. At that exact moment, the elevator stopped on the 6th floor where I live. The doors opened and I started walking out saying, "Have a good morning." He lifted his head and his sinister expression changed to an even more terrifying smile. What he had taken out of his bag, a huge kitchen knife. I screamed and started running down the hall. I swear that clown chased me, laughing like crazy. I ran as hard as I could when I heard those footsteps behind me. When I finally reached my door, I grabbed my keys, opened the door just as he came up behind me with the knife, slammed the door on him, and rushed to the phone to call 911. After my call, I looked through the Judas. No one left. My mother woke up and I told her everything. Soon after, the police arrived, but the clown had disappeared. They told me they believed me. And for good reason. In the building next door, a man had exactly the same clown costume had been seen, and he corresponded to my description. And a few days earlier in the neighborhood, a woman had been found strangled in her home. A witness claimed to have seen a clown prowling around. Fortunately, the police have promised to increase patrols and he continues to monitor the building. So please, creepy clown, don't you ever come near me again. When I was 7, we moved with my mother and my 2 older brothers, ages 13 and 15. At the time, we moved into a street built on old streetcar tracks from the early 1900s. The houses themselves were quite recent, disturbed by terraced houses. They were barely 15 years old when we got there. Each house had a small garden at the back, separated by a wooden fence about 1 meter high, and at the very bottom, there was a large concrete wall about 2 meters high that separated the gardens from a public park just behind. At that age, I spent most of my time on my own. The age gap with my brothers meant that I was often left out, and my parents had just divorced, so I invented games, adventures. I was playing in the garden with my imagination. It was normal to find myself playing alone in the back of the house. We also had rabbits who lived in a hutch against the big back wall. As I was curious, I even climbed onto the hutch to look over the wall towards the park. I was doing a little people watching kid version. I watched people walk through the park, making up stories in my head. That night I remember it was hot, and that the sun was setting a little late. I don't remember the exact time, but from the light in my memories they must have been around 7 p.m. I was standing on the hutch observing the park as usual, when I had a funny urge to turn my head to the right. The layout of the houses is important here. In our house, the back faces the kitchen, but in the neighbors on the right, their living room is in the back. When I turn my head to the right, I see that the glass door of their living room is open, but no light is on inside. The room is completely black and I can't see anything. I know the couch is facing that door, so someone sitting there would be right in front of me. And that's where I saw them, red lined up, motionless, floating in the middle of the black room. I began to squint my eyes trying to understand what I was seeing, and I swear that what I am going to describe to you, I have never forgotten. The red ones have moved. They made an arc column up and to the right, as if someone sitting stood up and their eyes naturally followed the movements. At the same time, the dark shape behind his eyes seemed to be slowly approaching the door. I couldn't make out any details. Just a black silhouette. I panicked, got out of the hutch, and ran to the living room right in the front of the house to warn my mother. She told me it was probably nothing, so in spite of everything I went back outside. I went back on the hutch. I looked immediately towards the neighbor's door, and there the figure is standing in the doorway looking out into the garden in my direction. His red eyes are still there. This time, I don't take any chances. I go back downstairs, I go back into the house, and I don't go back for the evening. I forgot about this story for years, but I've always been afraid of the dark. And most of all, I hate looking out of a window at night, especially if it faces the back of the house. A few years ago, something brought back memories of that night. And every time I talk about it, even today, I get tears in my eyes because I was really scared, and I still remember every detail. My neighbors still lived there, but I never had the courage to ask them if they had seen or experienced anything too, or if they had any explanation for what I saw that night.